I'll make sure to use this, right?
Yes.
You know, I found it interesting looking through how much curriculum has been added to schools decade by decade. You know, that was a really, even for someone who's spent time reading and studying this, surprised me how much has been added over the years. But the time hasn't increased. The day is the same amount of length, but on top of that, we're teaching a little bit of everything to everyone.
I think in the chapter that he was an aide for the day, I thought it was hysterical first, but one of the things that he said was when he entered the building, he remembered. That's what it looked like when he had been in school, and which is a sad state of affairs. But I used to tell my staff the same joke in a different way. The only place that Rip Van Winkle would be comfortable if he were to come back awake now is the public schools, which is truly a sad state of affairs.
And yet, within that very traditional classroom that looks so similar with all those little desks and its orderly little rows, in my 40-year career, I went from a blackboard in a building with no photocopy machine. And I ended my career teaching online during the COVID in the spring. Mm-hmm. You know, so many things have changed, except we are still trying to work all those changes into this archaic structure where children are sorted by age. I mean, where else in society we sort everybody by 1-year age increments? Do we have all the 25-year-olds in the room sitting together? No. Where else do we do that? No. So it's an archaic system, and we have to figure out how to fix it.
I thought another interesting point was what I think he called the great conversation, meaning that school districts and communities need to have a partnership that includes, he said 4 values, I think: understanding, trust, permission, and support. And I think that's a different challenge as well for a variety of reasons.
I was impressed by the narrative device he used to open the book, which, as I recall, was him talking about his father, who had turned out to have an extremely successful career. His father was sort of a problem child in school. And so I find it kind of funny that he turned out at first to be sort of critical of public schools when his father benefited directly from a teacher who worked a little bit harder to, you know, coach his father when he was a boy with skills that he needed. I just find it fun. I find it interesting because, you know, he goes on to say that, you know, it is like Jan said, and later on in the reading, he says that, you know, the schools mainly were built to teach, you know, really well a smaller group of kids and then the rest. So his father, I can't help but think that without that extra effort, his father may have ended up being one of those kids, and then would he have had the career he had, which he went into details about in the reading. So I just thought that was a cool narrative device and illustrated his point really well from the beginning of the book.
I think to Bob's point, you know, a lot of those components that you mentioned, understanding, trust, support, you know, probably were eroded significantly over the 20 to 30 years of No Child Left Behind, particularly where it was more about, you know, blaming people and blaming public schools for not doing this or that, preparing kids adequately, yada, yada. And so, there's a lot of rebuilding that needs to be done, and I think that's really the premise of his whole message, is that the schools can't do it by themselves, parents can't do it by themselves, businesses aren't going to be able to do it by themselves. We have to find a way to be able to productively engage and work together in order to, you know, make sure that youth are prepared for their futures and ultimately are able to successfully fill employment pipelines down the road. He talks a lot about, during that era of No Child Left Behind, it being considered a people problem, and him coming to a realization that it's a systems problem. Not that there aren't people problems, but it's really a systems issue. And I think our district oftentimes is on the front lines of advocating for system change, like at the state level, for example. And I think back to when Lisa was advocating strongly for our dual language students to be able to access the state testing for math and science and Spanish, since that's how it's taught to them. And basically, the state had never thought about making it available in anything other than English, and they weren't prepared to, do it differently, and were, I don't want to say resistant, but they just didn't have the capability of doing it. And so hopefully that'll be, a continued conversation. And most recently with the number of students across the state who are learning virtually, and then with a hybrid model, I think there's some issues of not wanting to do things differently as it relates to taking attendance for students. And again, it's, in their view, the easy thing to do is to treat it like every day of school and to measure it by who's engaged at a certain time versus taking a look at different ways of maybe measuring how to count someone in attendance who may not be able to learn at the same exact time of day as other kids and stuff.
One thing about being a special educator is that much of my career I worked with paraprofessionals. And I don't know how many paraprofessionals said, until I came and worked in a school, I had no idea how hard teachers work. Because your memory as a child of what that teacher's doing and what you see as an adult is very different. So his idea of understanding and trust, I think the fact that this man actually visited the schools made a big difference. And it comes through in his book.
Other comments? Our reading assignment for the next time is section 2.
Yeah, part 2.
Part 2, which is 41 to 75. Be prepared to share at least one thing that struck you in that space of 35, 40 pages. Thank you all. Would our student representatives please come up to the speakers table and introduce yourselves?
So we have 2 of our 3 student board reps with us this evening, and I've asked them to introduce themselves to the board this evening and maybe talk a little bit about how their first couple weeks of school have gone. And we have 2 of our student board reps that are in person at the high school, but on different schedules as far as the hybrid goes. And then one, Itzy, I think, is virtual, right? Yeah.
I'm Itzri Avalos. I go by Itzy, though. My parents are Gladys and Aaron Mundo. I am doing virtual learning this year as a senior, so that's kind of a little bit different than how I would have expected my senior year to go, but everyone's kind of adapting to the new year and everything like that. So I currently am in 3 classes. All of them are on different learning platforms. One of them is an MCC dual credit online, which is going through Canvas. The other one is through the Edmonton platform, and then the other one is on Blackboard. So navigating those 3 is a little tricky, but it's honestly a lot easier than I would have expected it to be. After high school, I'm thinking about pursuing my degree in psychology, because my end goal is to be some sort of therapist or psychiatrist or something along the lines of psychology. And anything else?
You also have a part-time job, I believe.
Yeah, I do have a part-time job at Starbucks. I work there. Basically, my schedule is I work all morning, and then I get home, and then I do school throughout the afternoon. Mhm. I do have 2 younger siblings, too, Aaron and Gigi Mundo. They go to St. Francis Elementary School, or private school. I also went there, and it was pretty cool, and that transition to public school was something, it was an interesting transition. But yeah, and then I've been in the public school system ever since.
School activities,
Oh yeah, school activities. So I'm in National Honor Society. I was in French Honor Society for a year. I'm in track. I do throwing events. I'm in MVP for the freshman mentoring program. I don't know, there's quite a long list. Those are the main ones I can think of right now.
Hi. I'm Haley Reed, and I am a junior at MHS. I am taking 4 dual credit classes through MCC this year, and I'm taking 2 high school classes, so it's been a little different, that's for sure. And I have 3 younger brothers that go through the Marshalltown district, and they're all at different schools. My mother's Sarah Reed, she teaches at the high school, and my dad's Tony Reed, and he is an executive director at the Juvenile Detention Center, and he runs our family business.
And he has signs all over.
And he has signs, he's been working hard on his campaign, that's for sure. I work at Hobby Lobby, and I also am working at Subway, so that's been a hassle, that's for sure. But I'm in school, so it's been really different, getting used to the arrows in school, and it's really weird. You only have 10 maybe at the most in your classroom, so yeah. I've been involved in the banner program since I've been at the high school, and the basketball program and the track program, and I am starting to be an MVP this year, now that I'm a junior. So that's me.
Well, welcome to both of you. We're happy to have you with us at our board meetings. Any questions for our young ladies?
Yeah, first of all, you guys are both really well-spoken. Congratulations, good job. Itzy, your virtual learning, tell me, what do you think of the volume of work, like homework and stuff, that you have to do as a virtual learner versus what you would have expected had you not been a virtual learner? Is it more difficult, less difficult, more work, less work?
I feel like for the actual high school class that I'm taking chemistry. I feel like it's not that much, it's not a big workload like I thought. But if you think about it throughout the school year, as if I would have taken it in class, I feel like it's not a big difference. It's just more you really have to commit the time to sit in front of the computer and do it every day if you want to. But even if you only work on it 1 or 2 days a week, you're good to go and you're staying on pace. But for my other 2 classes, since they are with college credit, they are a bit more work. But that's the same as with the high school. Last year I took a bunch of dual credit classes, and it's a commitment to take the dual credit classes, because it is a lot of work. But I don't feel like it's any harder as if you would have taken it in class. The only thing is you have to put the pressure on yourself to get it done, because you're not going to school every day.
So what I think I'm hearing you say, I'll just summarize and tell me if I summarize it incorrectly, that your chemistry class, which is a high school class, is about the same amount of work whether you're taking it virtually or whether you were there, you think?
Yeah,
Okay,
for the
good,
most part.
good.
Yeah, I don't feel like it's any more work than if you would have done it in
Okay.
class.
What I'm hearing is it's not more work, but you do have to have more self-discipline.
Yes, yes, definitely. Because if you're in class, like they give you class time to do it. At home, you have to sit and make sure you're on task and getting it done.
And then Haley, now you're at school 2 days a week and then home now, so about how much time do you have to spend at home on those days that you're not in school?
I usually spend a couple hours every day. It is a lot of work that they are sending home to do on our online days, and then you go into school and then you kind of do a little quick overview about what you had to do on your online days, and then you just continue on to the next lesson. And it's pretty self-driven as well to get it done, and they're expecting it to be done, which it's a lot.
So does it help as far as with your part-time jobs that you can do the 2 days on, 2 days off, or?
Yes, it does. It's a lot of time management, and it's very, like I said, it's self-driven. You have to make sure you're getting it done, but it gives you a lot of free time.
Welcome, ladies. We'll look forward to a little report from you at our next meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Bullet?
All right, the first item here is our depository resolution, and this is something that the board approves on an annual basis, and it is just identifying our financial institutions that we will use that we may use during the upcoming year. And there are no changes in the depositories or the amounts for the upcoming year. Pretty straightforward.
Questions for Paulette?
I'm sure you've mentioned this, but how do we choose these?
We do requests for proposals every so often. As you can imagine, changing banks is a huge task with a $98 million budget or so. So we don't do that every 3 years or every 2 years, but yes, every once in a while, we will do a proposal for banking services. As far as, because I present a depository report to you each month on a monthly basis, and that tells you, where our money is currently at. And as far as where we're keeping our money, we try to keep it where we're getting the highest interest rate.
I think, wasn't it, we went out to bid, was it 2.5, 3 years ago when we switched banking services?
It was before I started working with the district.
May I have a motion to approve the resolution identifying financial institutions eligible to receive public funds and to establish a maximum to be kept in deposit at these institutions?
So moved. Heitman.
Second, Hernandez. Heitman, Hernandez, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. The motion carries 7-0. I'll let you keep rolling.
All right, I'll keep rolling. Let's get to the next item here.
Fund financials.
Yeah, so I'm really happy to be here tonight to talk about our 2019-2020 fiscal year, that, just as a reminder for the new board members, our fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. So we have spent the last couple months working on 3 different reports that are due to the Department of Ed actually this week, and closing out our school year, our fiscal year. While fiscal 20 was unique and somewhat challenging in many ways, there is some positive news that I would like to share with you regarding our year-end numbers. The first report that is on, can you open the other one up, Amy, first? There's one attached on. And I also gave this to you because I know the numbers are hard to see. So what I want to do is just quickly review our treasurer's report by fund. You recall that we have several different funds that have their own self-balancing set of books, basically, and that we cannot normally take money from funds and shift to other funds without specific authority to do so. So what this report is showing you is our beginning of the year fund balance plus your annual revenues minus your annual expenditures equals your end of year fund balance. I did throw on numbers from fiscal 19 also. While 2 years does not a trend make, I think it's important to have some context to look at annual numbers. So a lot of times we'll be looking at 2, 3, 4 years at a time. But I'm just going to go through each fund, and we're going to save the general fund till last because I'd like to talk just a little bit more in depth about the general fund. But I also included down there in the boxes towards the bottom just some brief descriptions of the revenues, the expenditures, and what those funds can be used for. So if you look at the student activity fund, which is funded entirely by gate receipts, activity ticket sales, fundraisers, donations, and it's used entirely for student extracurricular and co-curricular activities. A couple of years ago, in July of 2018, we had a beginning fund balance of $142,000. We ended June 30th, 2020 with an ending fund balance of about $200,000. That balance was down a little bit from the beginning of this year, but because of the closure, we had less revenue from gate receipts and things like that. So trending well there. The management levy fund, if you'll notice that from the beginning of 2018 to the end of 2020, that fund balance has dropped from 1.8 million to 1.3 million. And we purposely did that. Your management fund is funded entirely by property tax. And it can only be used for very specific purposes, which are our property casualty insurance premiums, work comp insurance premiums, unemployment, and our early retirement incentive. So those are all paid for out of the management fund. And because we had such a big fund balance in there, we decided to not ask for so much through property tax so we could help in some other areas. The Pearl Fund is the Public Education and Recreation Levy. This too is 100% funded by property taxes. It's a 13.5 cent per thousand tax, and it can be used to update or add playgrounds, anything that basically is free to the public to use for recreational purposes. You can also run community ed programs through that fund. We currently do not do that. The sales tax fund, this of course is primarily funded by the 1 cent sales tax money that every school district gets based on a per pupil formula. We had a really high balance in July of 18. That balance has come down because we finished the Roundhouse project and don't currently have any big construction projects other than the tennis court going on, but that wasn't even, I think we only had one payment for the tennis court at June 30th. So anyway, that fund is right where we expected it to be. The PEPL fund is the Physical Plant and Equipment Levy Fund. This fund is funded 100% by property tax also. And this is the fund that we use to purchase our buses, to do summer projects for buildings and grounds. Maintenance, vehicle, we pay our lease out of this fund. And so you notice that fund balance went up a little bit at the end of fiscal '20, and there were a lot of projects in progress that hadn't been paid for yet at June 30th. So that is why that's up a little bit. The debt service fund, this fund is used entirely just to pay our principal and interest payments on our authorized debt indebtedness. This usually has a high balance at the end of the year because our debt payments are due on July 1st. So the very next day, that fund balance basically goes to zero. Enterprise fund is our student nutrition fund. This is where the school breakfast and lunch programs are run through. Primarily, the revenue in this fund comes from the federal government for those programs. You may notice that the fund balance for the nutrition fund is up a little bit, and that is also after we did that indirect cost recovery from the nutrition fund to the general fund this year that the board approved, I think in May or June. So the internal service fund is the fund that we run our self-funded health plan through, our self-funded dental plan, and our flex spending account goes through there. So the good news there too is that we did increase the fund balance a little bit, which will help us grow that claim stabilization reserve that we are trying to do. Scholarship funds and the support trust fund, we were using both of those funds for the same thing, and the support trust fund really isn't used for scholarships for students, so we actually closed that fund out at June 30th and moved it to the scholarship fund. So we currently have about $77,000 in scholarship funds that have been donated to the district that we oversee and pay out to colleges and students each fall. Does anybody have any questions on those funds before we talk about the general fund?
Pull out on the Pearl funds. Those funds are shared with the city of Marshalltown, and I think as far as the park and recs go, a lot of their funds are used, I think, more for programming costs, whereas we tend to use ours for playground improvements and stuff like that.
Yep, so on the general fund, you're going to notice that our fund balance is up at the end of fiscal '20 to about $6.5 million, which is the good news. And then can you pull that other one up, Amy? The second page that I gave you is just a little bit more analysis regarding the general fund revenues and expenditures. And we don't want to go into a whole bunch of detail here, but I do want to kind of explain why that fund balance is up a little bit. Obviously, you are aware that during the closure, we did, as other school districts in Iowa did, and we continued to pay our employees throughout the closure. But what we didn't have during the closure was a lot of payroll expenses for substitute teachers, substitute paras, substitute admin assistants. So we had less expenses because of the closure. And the other thing that happened, which is really good, is that we had more revenue than we budgeted for. So both of those things helped to grow that fund balance at the end of the year. Now, the other thing that I want to note too is that that $6.5 million is not all money that's available to pay utilities or to buy diesel fuel. About 25% of that fund balance is categorical funding, and so it can only be used, it can only be used for specific purposes, such as professional development or early literacy, very specific purposes that we can't take that money and just pay the utility bill with it. So about 25% of that fund balance is categorical. The other thing to note on the ending fund balance is that in our 5-year projections, our modeling that we do, and the budget that the board just approved in April, the certified budget, our projection was to be at about 6.5 million at the end of this current year, at fiscal '21. So what the closure has done is kind of put us ahead a year in building up that solvency ratio that has been low for the last several years. So I think that's really good news. When we look at the analysis for the revenue, I personally like to be within 1% of budget for revenues and expenditures. Obviously, it's a little bit easier to do for revenues than expenditures, but we did pretty good. The revenue from local sources, that 708,000, that is primarily the IRS refund that we received. We, of course, did not budget that we were going to receive that because we didn't know that we were going to receive it. So that is primarily what accounts for that. We also did, as I mentioned earlier, that indirect cost transfer from the nutrition fund. And we were able to transfer at year end $150,000 from the nutrition fund to the general fund for all of that indirect cost recovery. There are several things that, expenses that apply to the nutrition fund but aren't allowable in the nutrition fund. And so indirect cost recovery is the means to recover some of those expenses. So we did that this year. The other thing that you're going to see from this past year is that due to the closure, there was a lot of title funding or title programming that wasn't able to be provided. So we spent less money in the federal sources, and that accounts for that 10% there. On the expenditure side, as I said before, we did have some savings due to the closure on teachers, paras, admin assistants. We underspent our expenditure budget by $1,069,000. 890 of that is just on the salaries and benefits, which is 83% of that underspending. But it's important for everybody to remember that on both the revenue side and the expenditure side, these are one-time savings. It's not a recurring increase. So like I said before, this will help us get closer to that 8% minimum solvency ratio. It kind of pushes us ahead a year. But the other thing that we also know is that in this current year, we're probably going to have some expenses that we weren't planning on due to COVID and the closure also. The other items that look different on there, you'll notice that for purchase services, the 300 object codes, we overspent in that area and we underspent in the 600 object code. And so we have a very specific chart of accounts, and the DE created a new coding thing for us this year. So a lot of what we would have coded to a 600, we instead coded to a 300. So those two things kind of offset each other. What else? Professional development costs were way down, of course, because we didn't let anybody, or nobody wanted to go anywhere, could go anywhere. So both in the teacher compensation that we pay for professional development time and in travel costs, those expenses were way down for the year. So I guess in closing, it was financially, fiscally, we ended the year in a good position. And I hope that we'll manage through this year too.
Questions for Paulette?
I think you did remarkably well in managing this through a disaster, too, or two disasters.
Is there any, I mean, because I know we had supplies and other COVID-related things that we bought prior to the end of the fiscal year. Is some of that already reflected in the expenditures, or are those?
Some of that is, but as, for an example, the CARES funding that we got, about 860,000, we actually spent less than 200,000 of that by June 30th.
Okay.
We had a lot of stuff on order, but had not received it by June 30th. So that CARES funding that we received that was not spent, we have to call that deferred revenue. And so that's not included in here. So yeah, we will spend that this year then. We have the remainder of the CARES funding, and then we have about 255,000 in federal GEARS funding for the technology. So we will easily spend that 1.2 million this year.
And then we're also hoping and/or working towards some FEMA
Yeah.
reimbursement as well.
Yep.
For PPE. and-
Yep, we have an application, a request for public assistance into FEMA for the COVID emergency. And so we will submit everything that we can to FEMA. We know that there's some things that they won't cover. We know that there's some things that we don't know if they're going to cover, but we'll just submit everything and see what they will reimburse us for. And then anything that isn't reimbursed will get coded to either the CARES funding or the GEARS funding.
Thank you very much.
You are welcome.
You're still on board.
Still on board, okay. So for our newer board members, you might be aware that we have master contracts with several different classifications of employees, and the teachers have what we call a salary schedule, that they can move steps and they can also move lanes by getting more education. And so the steps, you automatically get a step increase every year, but there are many of our teachers that pursue additional education and qualify for a lane change every year. So this list is that list of teachers that qualified for the lane change this fall, which means they actually get a new contract reflecting that lane change and that increase in pay. So that's what we're approving here, is their increase in pay. And we currently have, I think 55% of our teaching staff this fall have masters or a doctorate. So that's really impressive. To have over 50% with masters.
Continuous learners.
Yes.
What is the percentage you said? What was the percentage of that?
What's that?
What was the percentage of that?
5-5.
55% have masters.
Okay.
So we're just asking the board for approval to change their contracts due to the lane changes.
May I have go ahead.
Move for approval.
Second.
Miller, Unteed, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. The motion carries 7-0.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Schutte.
Karina, do you want to speak towards your policies, please?
I can. Okay. Where should we start? 200, sorry. 202.7 individual board members. That one, we're adding
What's your recommendation?
Recommendations, we added to 200.2 powers of board of directors. It fits perfectly under that policy, so I'm asking to delete 200.27, 202.7, and add it to 200.2.
So you're recommending that 2027 be deleted?
Yes.
May I have a motion to do that?
So moved.
Second.
McGinnis, Untied, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. The motion carries.
And then 203.1, formulation, review, and revising of policy is the same as ISB, just in a different order, so would like to update the policy number as well as the title, and then the years that are listed are through 2026.
Are there any objections to marking it as reviewed? Okay. Thank you.
And as Karina mentioned, 200.2 then would come back for a first reading since we added a paragraph to that.
202.7, right.
Yep.
Okay.
204.9R1 board calendar, this is basically the calendar agenda of standing items that come before the board. We've got quite a few adjustments there as we normally look at it each year and make movement based on when is the best timing in order to bring those things forward, usually based on deadlines and when reports are due. A number of things have changed. So that'll come back before you at the next meeting as well. And then we had 4 additional policies through IASB that all have to do with board policy development, which is one of the primary roles of a board member. We simply didn't have anything in policy as was recommended for these things. So 209.1, development of policy, 209.2, adoption of policy, 209.3, dissemination of policy, and 209.4, suspension of policy are all short, descriptive policies that we'd recommend come back as a first reading at the next meeting.
Any questions for Dr. Schutte at this time? Okay. Mr. Sodders, anything of note?
Yes, so we are excited to have Mr. Mark Perna join us almost exactly a week from right now, as a matter of fact. He will be presenting to our staff the morning of Monday, what month is it?
28th.
Monday, September 28th. I'm already thinking about October so much. September 28th at 8 a.m., that's when our staff PD begins. And then Mr. Perna is going to present a free virtual keynote address regarding working with young people, working with the youth. And we think that, parents, educators, obviously, and business leaders here in town would be very interested in Mr. Perna's insights into working with young folks. So we really hope you all can join us, and please tell your friends and family and anyone else you know who might be interested to join us for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Looking at reminders, in addition to that virtual keynote, we have a board work session this Wednesday, which is on the board self-evaluation and the superintendent and board goal setting. We'll be meeting in the conference rooms from 5 to 7. Teacher Quality Committee meeting, the fall meeting, virtual meeting is on October 6th, and Jan is a member of that committee. And Jan, you get to do 2 board policies for the next meeting.
Okay, do I know what those are? Is that the 203.2 and the 203.4?
Yep.
Yep.
Gabby, I'll forward those to you also.
And our next board meeting is October 5th. We've had a number of committee meetings since we last met. Is there anything from the Finance Committee that we didn't talk about?
We talked about the year-end fund balances and report. We also talked a little bit about bonding capacity for future facilities projects.
And our solvency rate is much better than we had expected. Isn't it 7.3%?
7.7.
Oh, yeah.
Internal communications met. Dr. Ryan?
Yes, for those new to the board, that is the committee with the administrators here in central office, and then members of the MEA, stewards, the representatives from the teachers union. Sorry, apparently I can't speak tonight. We met last Friday, and just really briefly, a couple of the things that we had to talk about were, it was a really great opportunity to hear from the teachers and how they are doing in their buildings and what kind of feedback that they're getting from their colleagues and the students. We clarified some things about staff coverage and leaves and what does it look like, specific to COVID, if I'm in isolation or quarantine. So we were able to speak directly with those folks besides the documents that we've obviously already provided staff. There was some concern, that they're concerned about being burnt out or losing teachers because of, just all of the changes and the things that they're being asked to do given COVID and things like that. They also shared, frustrations with that students are struggling when they're at home, either in isolation or doing the virtual learning, and how there's some anxiety associated there. Questions about bandwidth, if we had enough bandwidth. And I think it was discovered that we're actually not using, we're only using about 20% of our bandwidth during, and I act like I know what I'm talking about, and I assure you I don't. But I'm told we only use about 20% during our peak times, so it's not a bandwidth issue. A lot of these virtual online learning platforms have an influx, obviously, of new users, and so that can be slowing the programs down, but that's not an issue on our side. And then just quickly, some other questions, clarifying some things about the keynote speaker and when that is, and if it's on contract time or not. And then finally, the last thing that we spoke about was Remind is that app that we are asking our staff to use to communicate with families. And there was a question about if they could stop receiving those messages in the evening times off contract. So if there was a way in the system so that they wouldn't be receiving those messages. And so it was really, just to sum up, it was really a meeting just to hear some feedback, answer some of those questions. Those meetings are really useful for us to connect and to have that opportunity, FaceTime, to be there and answer those questions directly. And I should note also that hopefully you all have received the email for the Equity Committee. We are starting that back up this year. And this year we really are hoping to get committee members who are part of the public. We're hoping to get some students on board, and then employees outside of just the certified staff. In the past, it's just been certified staff. And I'd really like to see employee groups or people joining the committee from across all employee groups. So in the last few days, you've seen some communication and a Google form. So we're hoping to really get that going and get some excitement and interest from across a lot of groups in the community.
Thank you. The Facilities Committee met on Friday. Sean, Mike, Sarah, anything?
And we talked about potential facilities improvements. I guess the primary thing we talked about was air conditioning at the high school was the most prominent topic of discussion, and other HVAC-related subjects. So,
Talked about bond capacity, which you mentioned in your finance meeting.
Yeah.
We talked about record low interest rates. And that maybe high school air conditioning can be done for a lot less than what
a lot less
we thought.
than perhaps we've been led to believe
Yep.
for
And
quite a while. So,
I thought it was a meeting full of good news.
Good. We can all use good news. Theron Acer this morning?
BNI participated in the ACER meeting. It was well-attended. All the respective parties were represented. Some of the highlight takeaways that I had were the Marshall County representatives talked about how Marshalltown residents were receiving calls on some sticker shock related to property taxes, which in part were due to the bond coming on the tax rolls for the community college project for the first time, and also some ag land rollback. Steve also mentioned that with Iowa workforce development, there's been an expansion of counties covered. So I believe he said that our office now covers 9 counties, I think he said, stretching all the way to like Centerville, Fairfield, Keosauqua. So they're going to be stretched quite a bit. And just how the rural areas of the county have really been hit hard with the derecho damage and recovery there. Jared Heil also mentioned that they're working hard on trying to get delinquent taxes collected, and they'll be reaching out probably soon to the city and the school district regarding options in terms of how to further pursue that down the road. Iowa Valley Community College District, Robin talked about how the improvements that they're going to make to facilities in Marshalltown based on that recent bond referendum are likely will start taking place next spring. And she talked a little bit about how their calendar got pushed back as a result of the derecho, similar to the school district. Lynn Oberding talked about the new economic development director having recently been hired. I think his first day was the day of the derecho, actually. And then about the displacement of their offices from Fisher Community Center due to damage, and how they're at least temporarily going to be housed in the church across the street from here. Shelley Lovell from the Waterworks talked about how they took damage to their plant relative to power, I believe, and so they're still working with insurance adjusters and experts on what they need to do in order to rectify the situation they've got there at the Waterworks. And Iowa State University Extension, as well as the AAs, talked about how their offices are back to fully operating and providing services, but for the most part, those services are being provided and or encouraged to be done virtually when and if possible in light of the pandemic. Is there anything else that you can think of, B?
Thank you. What have we done this evening to improve the education of the students in the Marshalltown district?
Oh, we have grown reserves. Financial ones.
We've received student feedback about the online and on-site classes.
Can I ask one other question? We're in the miscellaneous section of the agenda, and it just occurred to me. Is it okay?
Yeah.
I forget how waivers occur for testing, but have we received any state waiver for testing, and/or has the state of Iowa gotten anything from the federal government related to that?
I don't believe any determinations have been made for this coming year on that.
Are there requests or no? I don't know how it works.
Well, generally, if there were a request, it would come from our Iowa Department of Education to the federal government for that.
Has that happened?
Not that I'm aware of.
There are a number of states that have done that, though, right?
We actually are just launching fall testing for all kids, virtual too.
The fast testing. Yeah. So our intermittent testing is happening at the state level, but In terms of the end-of-the-year state tests, there's been no yay or nay as to whether that's going to happen.
But you don't, I mean, it's reasonable to assert that this could produce results that would be an aberration from trends, right?
Could, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other things that we've done this evening that will make education better for our students.
I was just pulling up, we had 64 teachers that moved lanes,
Pretty
so
remarkable.
pretty remarkable. A real commitment to continuing education amongst our faculty. So that's really cool to see.
My quote for this evening comes from Marion Wright Edelman. She is the director of the National Children's Defense Fund. Those of you who have been on the board for a bit would have seen a video that I played a few years ago called "A Prayer for Children." Her quote is this: "Education is for improving the lives of others and for leaving your community and world better than you found it." Let's take a quick break. Come back at 6:45 for our readmission. And maybe they'll be here early.
I think they're all here.
Do I need what?
We'll do it when we come back from break. So it's on the recording.
Computer really quick
Sure.
for that to keep it awake longer.
Yeah, or do you want to just do it during the week sometime?
Well, I have to do it when you're setting it.
Okay.
Is the only thing, that's why I can just
Well,
go
I
use-
will let you do that. I'm going
I don't know, I'd watch out, she's probably gonna put a virus
I'm
on
gonna
there.
put a virus up there.
to have to deal with it if she does.
Yeah, I'm too scared to close that.
Yeah, I'm a pretty scary person with my walker.
Because otherwise it takes us 5 to 10 minutes to
Well,
break down.
we have to have the motion on the tape,
Okay.
on the recording, and that's
Can I
just
just stop
awkward to,
recording?
yeah.
Okay.
It's just
It'll be
awkward.
warm.
Okay.
Go into
It's kinda
closed
cold over
session
there.
and then sit here for.
Yeah,